Welcome to Take Off Your Shoes. My name is Reverend Marie Duquette. I'm an ordained minister in the Lutheran tradition, and I believe that where my story, your story, and God's story meet, there is holy ground.
The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 2nd chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
I love this story. When the call committee first interviewed me, they asked me, "What is your favorite season of the church?" And I said, Epiphany. Therefore, since the day of Epiphany is tomorrow, I had no choice but to shoehorn the reading into today. I love this story. It is relatable. It's about three friends, colleagues, mystics, magi, definitely scientists, taking a trip. The destination is a holy event, the birth of a baby, always a holy event. They're taking gifts. Of course they're taking gifts. They're guided by the stars, the original GPS. An angel makes an appearance and gives them a heads up about danger that would cross their path if they do not take another way home. They see Jesus, a.k.a. Emmanuel, a.k.a. God with us, a.k.a. God with them. And they rethink their orders from King Herod. It was, after all, an unjust order from a vindictive tyrant, and they chose to defy him and not to report back with intel on Jesus. To go home by another way, and they were brave. It's not. I want to tell you a brief story as we get to know one another about taking another way home when my youngest son was learning to drive age 15. We had gone down to Florida, he and I, for spring break, and he was practicing his time at the wheel, and I was enjoying not having to drive the whole way. On the way back, we got into a traffic jam on I-75, unlike any I had ever been in. It was so thick, people shut off their cars and got out. I said to him, "We could take this next exit, and we could take the back roads. There are back roads that parallel the freeway through Georgia for a while, and your mom can read a map." And so we did that very thing. We got off. And the things that we saw on that part of our journey were so beautiful, so interesting, that it sparked conversation between Chase and I that sounded very differently than, how long are we going to sit in this traffic? Right? We saw a family reunion in which a group of African-American men were playing a game of pool in their garage, and another one was playing an upright player piano in the driveway. We saw a front yard filled with tire swings in which somebody had spray painted each tire a different color, and every tire had a child in it. And so it goes all along the way. We made memories, and we were completely distracted from the ride we would have taken if we didn't take another way home. Interesting. When we got to the border of southern Ohio, it was pouring rain right then. It was a storm. Cracks of thunder, huge bolts of lightning. I've always enjoyed a good storm. I was fascinated, to be really honest. I forgot that my new driver might be intimidated by what he was driving through, but he was doing okay. So I didn't say anything. And suddenly, there was a crack of thunder, followed by a bolt of lightning that seemed like it would reach the top of the sanctuary. One of the most wicked bolts of thunder I'd ever seen. And I, in my excitement, said to him, Chase, that hit something. That hit a tree. That hit a building. We are going to read about what that hit in the papers this week. Just you wait. And he said to me, Mom, how about you take the wheel now? It did turn up in the papers. We did read about it. Turns out the lightning had hit something that used to exist in Ohio that locals called Touchdown Jesus. Maybe some of you have seen it, right? The statue of Jesus outside of Mega Church, 629 feet tall, and not only did it hit Jesus, it burned that statue to the ground. You better believe it was covered in the papers. And it was interesting to listen to the chatter afterwards, all of the theories of exactly what happened. You know how they go. God was so mad at us. God tried to prove a point. This was a golden calf. Nobody should be building 620 feet high statues of Jesus. Actually, it was a very sacred statue, and Jesus was in it, and now Jesus is no longer with us, to which I thought, I'm not sure Jesus was in it. I think Jesus was in the storm, because that's where we have often found him if you look in your Bible. But at any rate, if we hadn't taken the different way home, we would have missed that event, and it was worth seeing, I tell you. So that's one example of the kinds of things we miss when we persist in always taking the same route and not being willing to go off-road a little bit. And this memory is one that both Chase and I have treasured ever since. It comes up in our conversations at least every other year. And so there it is. That said, I want to acknowledge that taking another route home is not easy, and it's usually not preferred. I mean, there's a reason we say that we drive home on autopilot, right? We know exactly where the landmarks are. We know exactly when we get to this corner, which has this restaurant on the corner that we're only 0.2 miles next, even before we pull up in our own driveway. Routines are comfortable for us. And so taking another way home is not always easy. It wasn't easy for the Magi either, of course. I'm just imagining them, sandstorms, unfamiliar travelers they might have seen on the way, not quite knowing if they would have been dangerous or helpful. The oasis they usually would stop at is nowhere to be found. But we know what it's like too. We weren't there then, but we know, I guarantee, someone in here has been on the way home and had a flight canceled, and then another flight canceled, and then got on the plane and not taken off right away, that you've been detained by accidents either on the freeway or, God forbid, in your own vehicle, that you've had to take unexpected side trips, maybe through a hospital. The dangers are real. James Taylor, the great songwriter and storyteller, actually has a song called Home by Another Way that parallels the gospel story I read to you this morning. And with apologies to James Taylor, I just want to give you a flavor for it because he tells this story so well. And so James Taylor opens by singing, those magic men, the magi, some people call them wise, or oriental, even kings. Well, anyway, those guys, they visited with Jesus, they sure enjoyed their stay. Then warned in a dream of King Herod's scheme, they went home by another way. I like the way that he talks about the identity of the Magi, because it's something we've done ever since. Exactly how many, what their names were they men or women? We settle on 3 because there's 3 in our nativity scenes, I think. But going home by another way has dangers beyond the road itself or not knowing the route. The first time you leave a beloved job and drive home, that's going home by another way. If you've been laid off, if you've been fired, that's going home by another way. If you're on your way home after burying a beloved, especially if they were someone you might drive with or see along the way, or who would meet you at the door when you got home, that's going home by another way, because everything seems different, does it not? You can go home by another way when the way you go home has been altered. You used to walk in the door, now you got a new hip. Now you use a cane or a walker or a wheelchair that you have to make friends with. That too is going home by another way. We go home by another way when the way itself has changed. Remember when COVID first hit and we would drive down the empty streets and we would see restaurants that had signs on it, hopeful signs that said, closed for the pandemic, see you in 3 weeks. And then some of those restaurants we came to see closed forever. And we knew the families who ran them, and they had invested their whole life savings in them. And the landscape of the road home changed as we grieved. You can go home by another way when the way has been marred by violence, human violence or nature's violence. Can you imagine what it is like for people in California, Canada, Denver, Colorado, when their entire neighborhood has been wiped out by forest fires, wildfires? Now they can't even go home. So they're going home to a new home by another way. That's really hard. And then I think, of course, of Asheville, North Carolina, devastated by a hurricane just recently. Maybe some of you have been there. And it broke our hearts, realizing that the way to that beautiful place was covered in water. Yet even in this, all of these different ways that force us to go home by another way, even in this, we do find angels who help us along the way, who show us the way. My friend Melanie tells a story, and before I begin, let me say this: Melanie is a RN, a science-believing woman. She does not make things up. She was driving home, her children were sleeping in the back seat, just toddlers, and she had to go around a lake with no guardrails, and it was sheer ice on the road. And she couldn't see, there was no street light. And she prayed, God, just help me get these babies home. Just help me to see the edge of the road. And up in the distance, she says she saw someone with an old-fashioned lantern holding it by the curb. And she passed it, and she dared not look at the person to see if she knew them. But when she got through the danger, she looked in her rearview mirror. There was no light. These things happen all the time. Whether you want to believe them or explain them is up to you, but it is true. There are angels among us, and they show up in all different ways. I would be remiss at this point if I did not also mention, God bless him, Jimmy Carter, who we lost this week. If ever there was a person who lived his faith so loudly that he didn't have to tell anyone he was a believer in Jesus, Jimmy Carter was the one. And he went home by another way because he thought at the end of 4 years he was going back to the White House where he had been living. But instead he went home to Georgia. And because he went another way, because he did that, his legacy is that this new way enabled him to work, him and Rosalind, I might add, to work with 103,000 volunteers in 14 countries to build and renovate 4,331 homes and become the face of Habitat for Humanity. Going home by another way sometimes brings gifts we couldn't even imagine. Returning to our gospel story now, the Magi did make it to see Jesus. We heard they paid homage with their gifts. We heard that they did not bow down and cooperate with King Herod. They took the angel up on the offer to travel another way home, and they did it after seeing God in the flesh. And so we can only imagine that after you see God in the flesh, you would be focused on God's guidance. And they may have avoided the traumas of narrowly escaping danger. But I want to say for just a moment something about the traumas, because we all have them, and we all have triggers. And thanks be to God, we're starting to talk a little bit more about mental health and about our triggers and give trigger warnings and be more sensitive to one another when we react in ways that other people may not understand. James Taylor even covers this concept of how trauma can impact the way you see new people in your life. He says, "Steer clear of royal welcomes, avoid a big to-do. A king who would slaughter the innocents will not cut a deal for you. He really, really wants those presents. He'll comb your camel's fur till his boys announce they found trace amounts of your frankincense, gold, and myrrh." Right? And so he talks about the traumas that happen when we go to a new place and we remember people who have hurt us, and we meet new people and we think they might hurt us too. And he cautions that the heart of this story isn't even going home by the other way. The heart of this story is seeing Jesus. The heart of this story is holding on to the Jesus that we know. I really like, near the end of his song, this part. As I begin a new chapter, as we begin and find a new home, as you begin to perhaps call a new pastor who will lead you in ways that other pastors have not, who will sometimes annoy you as other pastors have, who may trigger arguments you've had before, because that's what it means to live in community. And that's why forgiveness is so important. It occurred to me when we were about 4 days into this journey that what the feeling I was having was homesickness. And it was a very strange feeling. We moved here from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was born and raised in Detroit, but I had been gone from Michigan for many years, and I had been happy to go back. I felt a little bit homeless. Didn't feel like I was going home yet, but I knew that I wasn't going back. James Taylor writes this: home is where they want you now. You can more or less assume you'll be welcome in the end. Mustn't let King Herod haunt you so, or fantasize his features when you're looking at a friend. And it was a good reminder to me that a new beginning is a second chance. It's a gift from God. And if we are lucky, we notice that that's exactly what it is, a gift from God. And so we embrace it as such. And we try to give new people we meet the benefit of the doubt. And we try to remember that even though sometimes they might remind us of someone else who did not treat us well, they are not that person. And we trust that everyone is doing the best that they can, especially those who are part of the body of Christ. There is grace. There's grace in the world. There's grace in another way. There is always another way. And you know this better than most. Because today you are choosing another way to continue walking faithfully. You chose to do the hard work for years, to stay together, to continue to serve your community, to feed hungry people, to trust in the Lord, to lean not on your own understanding, to do the paperwork, to return the phone calls, to read the emails, to worship and pray, endless loop. The next years will absolutely be filled with challenges, no doubt. Some of them will require us to be very brave. There is no shortage of tyrants in the world today. We will need to find new routes. We will need to make new plans to continue following Jesus. We may need, like the Magi, to defy orders that come from somewhere that is not of God. Good news is, we can do this. We can do this together. We have done hard work before. We can do this together because just like the Magi, we have seen the Lord.
Thank you for listening to Take Off Your Shoes. Let me send you out now with this blessing. May God give you the grace never to sell yourself short, grace to risk something big for something good, and grace to remember the world is now too dangerous for anything but the truth and too small for anything but love.
If you're still listening, she held your attention. Give her a thumbs up and subscribe. Watch the video on her YouTube channel. Search on YouTube for Take Off Your Shoes with Marie Duquette, Duquette.